The opportunity to present to you tonight. We're excited to be sponsoring tonight's meeting. My name is Adam Laub. I'm the Vice President of Marketing. I've been with Stealthbits for about 10 years now. I'm one of the first employees with the organization. Along with me, I have Jeff Warren, who's our Vice President of Product Management. We could stand up here and talk to you tonight about all types of different things that we do across the Microsoft ecosystem and beyond, from operations management to audit and compliance to security. But what we really want to talk to you about tonight is unstructured data, and more specifically governing access to that unstructured data. It's a hot topic these days when you think about things like the NSA security breach, and essentially it's starting with Active Directory and extending down into this massive repository that all of our organizations have built within the file system, within SharePoint sites, the dumping ground of data over many years now. And you consider the state that Active Directory is in these days after 10 years of management, multiple security models, and really disjointed domains for us, etc. Combine that with all this data that sits out there. The question is, who has access to this data? And not just who has access, but who effectively has access to this data through deep level nesting and all other types of conditions that extend from AD down to the file system, from the local system policies upwards, etc. And what Jeff is going to be taking us through tonight is specifically how we address access governance over the file system in SharePoint, show you some unique solutions that we put in place to address that. And I think you're going to find this to be educational, as well as a pretty interesting approach to getting your hands around this very difficult problem. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Jeff, and hopefully we have a couple minutes at the end to address some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So my name is Jeff Warren. I'm Vice President of Product Management at Stealthbits. That gives me the opportunity to oversee a lot of our product direction, but I also work very closely with our customers who are deploying our product to help protect their data, and most importantly, their unstructured data. Their files, like documents, spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, and other data that they rely on to do their day job, but also that contains their sensitive and proprietary information that's very critical to protect. So what we are able to do is help them understand the risk that exists today with this unstructured data and put some processes in place to protect it. So most of the risk that exists is actually somewhat difficult to identify. People have access because they need access to do their job, but some of the challenges arises as users move throughout your organization. Probably many of the people here have changed job roles once or twice, whether it's promotion or shifting to a new department. As you do that, most of the time you're granted new access, because you need rights to do new things, access new project shares or SharePoint sites, whatever it may be. But many times the access that you used to have is not taken away, and you maintain that. And what a lot of organizations are struggling with is, how do you make sure that users have only the access that they need and no more? And how do you make sure that when that user is getting ready to hand in their 2 weeks notice, that they're not grabbing all the files that they have access to and taking it with them where they go next? And that's where we come in. So because this unstructured data is such a challenge and it's constantly growing, we help customers address two key areas to control the access to their data. And that's the privileged identities and the general user population. Now, the privileged identities are particularly challenging because that's the administrators that have access to your file systems out there, to your SharePoint farms. They need access to manage and fix issues that arise with this critical infrastructure. But as they get that access, they also have the ability to read all the files that are stored within them. That's things that they should not be doing. Also, your general user population are users in your sales, marketing departments, research and development, whatever it may be, that require access to your data. But many times, because of lack of structure and governance, they have too much access. So those are the two types of access that we help customers wrap their arms around and put security models in place for. And the first thing that we do is help them shift away from the access model that most people follow today, which is an IT-centric access model. Having your IT administrators be responsible for giving access to data. Most customers rely on this because the IT administrators are the ones who understand Active Directory. They understand SharePoint, they understand permissions, they understand complicated things that a line of business owner would not understand. So they're the ones with the ability to make access changes. However, that leads to them not making the right access decisions because they don't know who should and shouldn't have access to your data. So if you want to put an effective system in place to control access, you need to put the right people in charge of making those decisions. We refer to that as your data custodians. These are potentially non-technical line of business owners who maybe they don't understand how to manipulate permissions in Active Directory, but they do know who should and should not have access to their data. And they're able to make those tough decisions so that you can be sure the data is secured properly. So in order to successfully secure your data, you need to discover what's out there and prioritize risk and do any remediation of critical conditions that exist that would eradicate a system like this, such as open access. Many customers come to us because of open file shares or open SharePoint sites where everyone or authenticated users has access. Those are typically never needed but very frequently done to give people easy access to data. So we help you identify, clean up some of those conditions, find who should be responsible for your data, put them in charge, and give them the tools they need to make the decisions. And those are really two workflows. Entitlement reviews, so that if somebody owns a particular source of data, like a file share, they can review who has access to it and make changes without having to understand the details of how those changes are applied. That way, every so often, they're able to make sure that that access list is the right access list. Also, you need a way to give users access in the interim. If a new project share arises that somebody needs access to, they need to be able to request that access and have that request approved by the person who's responsible for that data, not by IT. Because IT, more often than not, is just going to say okay to get one less ticket on their queue. So that's the workflow that we help enable, and I'm going to walk you through a product demonstration showing you some of that today. So let me get out of the PowerPoint slide and move over here to my demonstration. And what I'm going to show you is our interface, which is called the Access Information Center. This is what gives users the ability to answer those conditions I was talking to you about who has access to my data, what are they doing with that access, is my data secure, and also identify owners and put them in charge of making these decisions. So depending on who you are in the organization, when you log into this, you're going to get a different experience. And I'm going to log in as an administrator first to show you the full suite of capabilities that you have through this product. So, all right, so when I'm logged in as the administrator, now I have the ability to tap into any of the data that Stealth Audit has collected. So what I'm going to show you first is how you can understand who has access to your data. You can do that very simply by searching up top, or if I drill down into a resource audit just to show you how you can pull up your file systems and your SharePoint data side by side. So we support both fully, and what I'm going to do is drill down into one of my file servers here and see a list of all of my shared folders on the left. So these are all unique access points that users can get access to your data across the network. Now, the first thing you're going to want to know is how are these secured? So let's say we have a share that I have responsibilities for here, the product management share. The first thing that we can show you is the permissions that are applied. That's pretty straightforward stuff. Here are the Active Directory groups that are applied to the share and the folder and what level of rights they give to this share. In the bottom right, by clicking on any of these groups, you can see the nested group memberships, and then you can expand this fully to see a list of all the users that are getting access through these different permissions. So that's good information. But what a lot of people, the real question that you want to ask is, well, as a result of all these different permissions to the share and to the folder, who really has access? Who can get to my data? I might be getting access through 3 different groups. But what can I really do if I were to access this over the network? Because that's what the risk is. And we call that our effective access calculation. So effective access takes into account all permissions to the share, to the folder, the different levels of rights that are applied, and expands all of the group memberships to give you a single list of here's everyone that can access this share and what they can do with it. And if I were to pick on myself here and find my own user to the product management share, I can see down below that my user actually has access through a variety of different ways. I have access because I'm a member of the product management group. I'm a member of the engineering group. And that group is nested inside of another group. If I wanted to change my access, it would require me to make at least 2 permission changes here to change what access I have to that share. And that's what a lot of customers struggle with, having the insight into their permissions so that they can make changes that actually give the desired level of access. And we have the ability to model those changes and apply them right from our interface. But understanding access is only part of the battle, because this is the potential for risk. This is your risk surface. This is who can get to your data. You want to be able to know, though, who has access to your data and what have they done with it. So we have the ability to monitor every access to all of your data and find out who's reading, deleting, changing permissions. What are they doing with this data, and how are they getting access to do it? So you can see here at a high level the trend of activity to this share. What we identify a lot of time at customer sites is they have shares that are open to a large population of people, and almost none of those people are accessing it. Very small percentage. But what you can see is the list of every single file that was accessed by each person, at what time, at what date, who's reading files, who's accessing, who's deleting. So that insight combined with the effective access begins to give you all the information you need to gain intelligence into the access and how your data is secure. And of course, we can do this down the entire file system structure at any point, any folder, anywhere you want to go. So that's some of the useful information that you need to build to be able to put controls over your unstructured data. And I want to show that through a slightly different view now, through the user view. So let's say you had a user who was, who handed in their 2 weeks notice today. And you want to know, what has that user done within the organization in the past 2 weeks? Because I want to make sure they're not taking any of my sensitive trade secrets with them to their next job. So by searching for a user here, I'll search for myself. What it pulls up right now is a list of every file I've read, every file I've deleted, every file I've touched in a configurable date range, as long as you can store the activity for it. So what this is telling me is, here's the potential for risk. This is everything that my user has touched in the past 2 weeks. I can see it at a variety of different levels. I can see how I'm getting access, all of my Active Directory groups that I belong to. I can see all the permissions that my user has spread out across the organization. And as I mentioned before, I can run an effective access audit to get a list of all of the access my user has to all the different shares. So these are the levels of insight you need to really be able to put the controls around your user population and give that forensic insight into who's doing what with their access to the data. Built upon this is what I'm going to show you next, our ability to put an owner in charge of this information who may not be in your IT department and allow them to start to make decisions around this data. And that's where organizations really start to identify significant benefits, because IT can only go so far. But if you can enable your user population, your business owners, to take control over their data, now you're able to spread out and basically crowdsource the access management across your organization without having IT making every decision, involved in every aspect. So if I log on as my own user, I should get a slightly different view. And one of the things you can see is that currently I have a review assigned to me because I'm the owner of the product management share, and there's an active review for that share. So by clicking into this, I have a very simplified view intended for a non-technical person who doesn't need to understand groups and permissions. All they need to understand is people and access. So this is a list of everybody who has access to my file share, my product management share. I can see all of their names, their departments, and their titles. I also see what levels of rights they have. Can they read data? Can they modify data? Or do they have full control? Full control includes the ability to change permissions. So that's a big risk right there. One thing I can do is, let's say I want to see who has full control. Well, at the top, I can see Adam right here. He has full control to my product management share because he's the VP of Global Product Management. But one of the interesting things that this is telling me is that his recommended access is actually modified because he's never performed manage activity. He's never changed permissions. So why does he need that right? We're able to use our activity insight to see what Adam does, compare it to what he could do, and recommend least privileged access. So if I were to come in here and change Adam's access to modify, he'd still be able to do everything he's ever done on this share, but I'm more secure now because there's no risk of Adam himself coming in and changing permissions or his account being compromised and somebody taking advantage of his ability to change permissions. And you can also see recommendations for users that have no activity, disabled accounts in Active Directory, users that have not logged onto the domain. So as an owner, what I'm going to do here is go through this list, read the recommendations, automatically apply them, choose whatever it is I want to do. Maybe in this case, I'll just pick on Adam. And then I have the ability to just take some notes here. So, Adam no longer needs manage rights. And then I have the ability to submit this change, which will get automatically applied to my file share access. Adam's rights will be moved down from full control to manage. So that's just a very simple example of how you can enable an owner to take a complicated subject like access to a file share and give them a simple interface allowing them to make decisions. And imagine you can push this out across tens of thousands of shares at once, getting all this data collected and automatically applied without having IT have to be in the middle of every single decision.
How are we looking at time?
Probably about 5-7 minutes. Give some time for questions.
Okay. So there's one other issue I want to address, and then I'll open it up for some questions. So what I covered so far is the ability to come in and understand access, understand activity, put an owner in charge, and allow them to review access. And that's great. That's going to catch a lot of over-provisioning and help you reel back access to the state that it needs to be in, significantly reducing your risk very fast. Another workflow I just want to briefly touch on is self-service access requests. So this is a big part of identity and access management. Many customers rely on features like this. If I need access, I want a way that I can request it. And I don't want to have to file a ticket and wait for IT to provision it, and it could be weeks before I get back the access I need. And in most cases, I'm probably getting more access than I want, or I might get the incorrect access. So as logging in to this interface as a regular user, what I see is a much simpler interface. And this is all, HTML5. You can view it on your smartphone, view it on your iPad, whatever it is you want to do to make an access request. But very simply, as an end user, I have the ability to come in here and make a request. So I can search for a file share by name. If I want access to my product management share, I can come in and I can request access. In this case, I've only published out the ability to request modify access, so that's what I have the ability to request. Once I perform that request, that gets routed to the owner. They get an alert on their inbox. They log in or from their phone have the ability to approve that request. It all gets audited so that every access change you have a complete history of, so you know exactly when somebody had access to a share, who approved it, and how long they've had that access. So there's a complete accountability trail for every access that you grant within your organization. So this, coupled with the entitlement reviews, has helped a lot of customers automate the control of access to their file shares and really streamline the process, getting IT out of the middle of it. So that's really what I wanted to cover today.
I wanted to make just a couple quick points about what you've seen here. So one thing that we of unstructured data solutions. We have partnered with the identity and access management vendors like SailPoint, Avexa, IBM's ISIM framework, Microsoft FIM, Curion, and others, and even if you have your own homegrown systems. We can create this entitlement store that exists within your applications today, but not within the unstructured data space, and be able to publish them into that existing workflow that your users are already using today and used to. So you don't necessarily need to use our interfaces here for self-service or entitlement reviews, but we offer it if you're looking for even an interim solution as you acquire and roll out an IAM solution on a broader scale. Additionally, we have direct integration with the largest storage providers and have unique methods of collecting this activity data and other pieces of data like access rights with those like NetApp and EMC. We've got our bases covered there with the big storage providers that you're probably using today, and have direct integration with those technologies to be able to tap into, let's say, an F policy within NetApp or CMOD within EMC. So I just want to make everyone aware of that, as I'm sure it's important to some of you, and maybe some of the questions that you were thinking of out of the gate here. Just to wrap things up here, as I mentioned in the beginning, it starts with Active Directory in most cases here. We have a very scalable and very in-depth solution to allow you to interrogate Active Directory. We are providing you all a free trial of this solution. It will scale inside of your environments on very minimal infrastructure. You just go to our website and request that download, very easy to find. And we'd invite you to take a look at it, and the proof's in the pudding. So obviously what we're talking about here is very large scale type stuff. You need to see that with your own eyes to believe it, and we understand that. We're up to the challenge to prove it to you. With that said, open it up to any questions that you might have. I know the gentleman over in the corner here had a question during the presentation. Would you like to ask that now?
Yeah, a lot of us work in confined environments. So you might have file shares, you might have SharePoint, you might have something else. Do you integrate with all that, allow that same sort of interface, or is it 3 different interfaces? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's all the same interface, and one of the things that we did to keep it in the same interface is we normalize permissions depending on what system we're going against. So whether it's SharePoint or file system, we report our permissions in read, write, manage, delete format. We have the ability to show you what's beneath that, but in SharePoint, you could get access by being a site collection administrator or a web application policy. You could have contribute role, design role. All those are SharePoint vernacular. On the file systems, you can have list and execute and all the NTFS permissions. On Unix, it's different with having 777 rights. So all of that we normalize into read, write, manage, delete, so we can provide the data in a single report. I didn't really show it, I guess, highlight as much earlier, but when I audited my user and said, what do I have access to and what do I have activity across, that was bringing back SharePoint activity, that was bringing back NAS activity, that was bringing back file system, Windows file system activity, all into a single report.
Non-product related question. What's the origin of the name StealthBits?
It's a good question. Our 2 co-founders, Steve Cochran and Kevin Foisey, both came from Quest Software. Doesn't have much to do with what the name was. They actually just thought it was a cool name. We wanted, originally, our solution was actually built around systems governance. We were designed originally to go out to your Windows operating system and be able to audit virtually anything at the OS layer in an agentless format, which back in the 2002 timeframe, agentless technologies were going out and scanning large scale environments like UPS and Verizon Wireless, which were some of our first customers. We were enabling them to go out in a very kind of stealth fashion, lightweight, no agent deployment, that type of architectural approach, and be able to assess the systems themselves. Were the proper patches deployed? Was the registry changed? Was the file definition changed during a patch deployment? And so the stealth component was meant to be our lightweight approach, and the bits from a technology perspective.
Good, thanks.
How do you license this?
This solution that we saw today is based upon the number of Active Directory users in your organization. And we employ a number of different licensing methodologies, both perpetual and term-based licensing. We offer services around the same things that you've seen today too. So those organizations that are going through, let's say, the rollout of an IAM solution, what they want us to come in and do, and we're doing this for a couple of large financials here, is to come in and transform their AD security group model for the file system to be able to feed this data properly into those frameworks. So we offer that as a service called the AD group transformation. But we can come in and offer professional services and managed services as well to operate the solution on your behalf or in conjunction with you if you don't want to just use it on your own. Any other questions?
I have one question. I'm always interested to know why you've been brought into companies. Maybe you can give us an example of when you called in, what was the number one problem the person was looking to solve, and then maybe how what was the process of solving that problem?
That's a great question, and actually Jeff's probably very well suited to answer from a specific customer perspective. I can tell you the primary problems that we solve and that type of thing. But Jeff, if you wouldn't mind commenting maybe on a couple of our customers and how they're using it.
Yeah, so I'm working with, I head up the professional services department also for this product, so I work with a lot of deployments. And 5 of the largest banks are using us. What 3 of those are doing is an open shares project, where they have open file shares within the organization where authenticated users, everyone, domain users have access. They want to get a process like this in place, but they know they can't because in some cases 40% of their shared folders are open to anyone. So no matter who you put in charge of decisions, the access is wide open. So what we do is actually go in, find out how bad the problem is, and help them remediate. And we actually have very advanced remediation capabilities. To touch on it briefly with open file shares, we deploy our agents for activity monitoring. We watch who's coming and going to those shares, and before we shut it down, we put those users into groups, permission them, and then close down the open access so that the users who need access don't lose it, and that way there's no disruption to your operations, and IT doesn't have to handle all of those tickets. So open shares is a big one, and the ability to enable data owners to take responsibility for their access is probably our number 2. But you got to start with closing down your vulnerabilities like open shares.
Go ahead. Would you have, what would your system have alerted with an Ed Snowden type process? But maybe not to that extreme in terms of what his planning and things like that. Just somebody something like that.
So we have alerts that are configured off of administrators reading files. So an administrator can perform certain types of activity events, and it wouldn't really be too suspicious. Changing permissions, creating shares, things like that are typically done by an administrator. But reading files, opening a massive amount of files, is what should not be done by a local administrator. So it's very straightforward to get an alert where an administrator has performed a certain amount of reads on your shares so that you would identify very quickly administrators are reading content. Why is that? We also have the ability to look inside the content, which I didn't get to show, and find out if it stores sensitive information like credit cards, social security numbers. So if you couple that with the activity events, now you know when an administrator is reading files that contain sensitive information, which could be an even more severe alert.
Thank you. That's great.
Sure.
Go ahead.
For like initial deployment, do you normally see kind of a spike in requests from the data owners or whoever they basically delegate access to for restoring files or access? So for example, if you're pushing all this kind of, I guess, control to the users essentially, and they go in, and even though you've explained it to them, you delegated control, so they go and select who has full access, read, write, or can modify the data, and I would assume that some of those folks then potentially can mistakenly either modify or delete data. So do you see that like on deployments, like a spike?
So what we try to encourage customers to do when we deploy this is try to be a little bit more restrictive, if you can. It's okay. If you remove somebody's access and they need it back, they can request it again. It's safer that way so that you don't see, you don't let too many people in and see them performing activity that they shouldn't do. So what we normally see is we try to help them restrict their access to the minimum amount, the least privilege, and then up front there might be a little bit of a swell in requests back for access for the users that do actually need it. But we're okay with that because it's better to edge on the side of security. As long as you have a quick way where a request can come in and you can approve that access within 5 minutes, you're really not impacting the operations too much.
Thank you very much.